So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Francesca Hillary. I'm the Director of External Affairs and Partnerships for both Partnerships for Tribal Carbon Solutions, a program of Global Ocean Health, and the Indigenous Greenhouse Gas Removal Commission. I'm also a member of the Confederated Tribes of Round Valley. The Forest Biomass Learning Network was launched by Partnerships for Tribal Carbon Solutions, along with a couple of our partners, including the Institute for Responsible Carbon Removal, as well as the Carbon Business Council. In the wake of last year's Intertribal Timber Council, their annual conference in Montana last year, we were part of conversations that made it clear just how much interest and need exists among tribal nations for accessible, practical information on biomass utilization, particularly forest biomass. As tribes across the country face mounting wildfire risks, Carl and I were just speaking about these things, and growing pressure on forest management budgets, especially when the Fed's support is so uncertain for tribes right now. The network was created to help tribal leaders, forest managers, their partners, and other people in the industry explore and expand on the range of pathways for putting forest biomass and residuals to work, from biochar and woody biomass burial to building materials, activated carbon, bio-oil, and now clean fuels. Today's session is our 8th webinar, and the network continues to grow, although it doesn't look like that today. I apologize. As I think the space has become a trusted place to exchange ideas. So we hope to continue this into the future. And so hopefully that will happen with future funding as well. So today's session, Forest Biomass to Clean Fuels, Exploring Emerging Bioenergy Pathways, takes us into some exciting and rapidly evolving territory. Most of us are familiar with biochar, heat, power as end products of forest biomass conversion, but today we're going to look further down the road at how woody biomass and forest residuals can serve as a feedstock for producing low carbon transportation fuels and other clean energy products. We have two outstanding speakers with us today who bring deep and complementary expertise to this topic. Our first speaker is Tom Hobby, CEO of Yosemite Clean Energy. Tom brings more than 25 years of experience spanning forestry, academic research, biomass utilization, bioenergy, and executive management, including over 15 years focused specifically on bioenergy commercialization. He has led forest management research on fuel hazard reduction and carbon emissions. He supported multiple tech startups and helped found a provincial bioenergy association that played a meaningful role in helping to grow North America's biogas industry. Through his consulting and management company, BioStewards, Inc., Tom has managed timberlands and forest operations in California for more than 2 decades and has conducted biomass energy feasibility studies, including forest feedstock assessments for U.S. tribes and Canadian First Nations, covering more than 2.5 million acres of timberland. Today, Tom will walk us through emerging pathways for converting forest biomass into renewable natural gas, hydrogen, and other clean fuel products through advanced gasification technologies, and how these systems may fit within broader forest management and wildlife mitigation strategies. Our second speaker is Kevin Blaser, Vice President of Business Development at Colusa Indian Energy. Kevin has extensive experience supporting tribal economic and energy development. He previously worked with the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe of Michigan, where he helped lead tribal energy initiatives, managed electricity market activities, and played a pivotal role in establishing the first tribal electric authority in the Midwest. His broader background spans tribal enterprise development, federal contracting, venture investment analysis, and financial markets. Together, Tom and Kevin will give us a rich, multidimensional view of where this space is headed and what it means for tribes, communities, forests, and the energy transition. So, all right, Tom, let's get started with you.
Great. And thank you very much. And then just a caveat up front, I have kind of a hard stop. I'm dealing with some family medical stuff after my presentation, so I'll try to
Okay.
listen in on the road. But thank you for the invitation and great to meet some of you virtually. And it's a pleasure to kind of share what we've been doing in the forest biomass to biofuels using gasification. And I guess I can share my screen to start kind of some slides. Is that okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
all right. I will try to figure out my screen here and get to the presentation. Let's see. Here we go. And let's start this slideshow. So yeah, thank you for the introduction of my background, so I don't need to continue anymore there. Um, we're based in California, and I'm a forest economist, and my career has been kind of diverse, as she mentioned, but we are working here in California developing biomass to biofuels projects. And just really to start, we've been really, for a long time seeing our forests be decimated with whether it's pine beetles and then following with wildfire. But really, the why of Yosemite Clean is I grew up in Yosemite, just outside the park gate, and I've watched it depreciate. And about 25 years ago, I decided I couldn't just sit there on the sidelines. I was out of forestry professionally. I was in banking. And I said, I got to get back into the game here. So instead of complaining at all these, government meetings or hearing just all the negative, I thought, all right, how can we make something positive? So went back to university for another piece of spaghetti after my name and focused on forest fuels reduction. And, the key problem was what do you do with all this small diameter wood and this biomass? So that got me involved. Like, we heard that, I got involved with a provincial association looking at technology. After about 10 years of kind of just being on the sidelines, I said, all right, I got to jump on a horse that I believe in. And that's what got me into gasification. And so I'll tell you a little bit about that. And I don't have to tell you forestry people about the problem with wildfires. California alone is 12.5 million acres over the last decade. Hundreds of lives, tens of thousands of structures, millions of homes that can't get of insurance. And the real kicker is like this is causing so much damage that even the U.S. Senate came out with a report a few years ago that ranged from 396 to 893 billion dollars a year of damage associated with wildfire. And what we're trying to do is I'm not a Wall Street guy. I did spend some time with farm credit banking, not Wall Street banking, but we are really trying to develop a community bottom up social enterprise where we have community investment from logging companies. We have farmers that are involved. We're really trying to, create the highest value for each ton of biomass and helping, basically put that back into the community because we just believe, being a small town person myself, that we can solve local problems with rolling up our sleeves and working together. So that's kind of Yosemite's model. We have two projects in California I'll tell you about, but we're about 100,000 bone dry tons a year. And we displace over 100,000 tons of CO2 because we capture the carbon. So we're carbon negative, and we're utilizing wood waste that otherwise it's going to be burning or rotting and dying in our forest. Again, I've already talked about the damage. If you want to see the breakdown, it's really, probably the biggest driver. I could say that if you looked at this, I make the joke that I'd give away my fuel for free, whether it's hydrogen or natural gas or SAF, if you just pay me the value of what we're saving to manage our forests well and, keep them healthy and keep them from burning and causing all this damage. I mean, we're not getting the externalities of the benefits of what we're doing in biofuels. I think that's a key message for all of us to think about. Like, forest management, we don't value it as a balance sheet globally. And I know there's some groups, even I was with the UK Forest Commission, their executive director, they've actually put a dollar value on their forest in England, and they're managing to those values of what's really on the, maybe not a tangible balance sheet, but even things like their watersheds and all these things for habitat, they've put some ecological value there, and they're making decisions based on those values. And I think we need more of that. Um, I won't go through all the forest stuff because you know the story in California. We're overgrown, and that's what's causing the fuel hazard. In a historical forest, we're obviously more open range, and we had before that, before settlement, we had indigenous. The tribes were burning. We had a whole different forest structure, right? And so that's been our problem in California, and it's more focused on the U.S. forest lands and our non-industrial timberlands in California have been the problem. There's just not money to manage these forests. So a lot of, about 25% of the forest holdings are small landowners from maybe 10 to a few hundred acres, and it's a problem. And we can't grant ourselves out of this problem. We got to find I call it a commercial solution that can make value out of this wood, pay the freight to get the wood out of the forest to clean up to the specifications or prescriptions. And that's kind of our goal. Just California alone, I've heard this stat just been increased by Lawrence Livermore from 78 to 119 million tons a year, about 90 million tons from forests. So we got a lot of wood to come deal with in California alone. And now to the fun stuff about technology. So again, 20 something years ago when I started looking at, how do you take a piece of wood and do something with it besides watch it burn in the forest? We had the combustion facilities all around America that have been around for 50 plus years. Well, we began to see new technologies emerge, things like pyrolysis, gasification. So I began at the university evaluating, different technologies, looking at feasibility. And here about nearly 13 years ago, I had somebody come pitch us this gasification technology from Austria. And it's called a dual fluidized bed gasifier. It's basically, I'll show a slide in a second about how it works, but it's been around for 20 years. Our former governor Schwarzenegger went there in 2007 and saw this facility. It was like, wow. We have over 200,000 hours of runtime using this technology. So our company has licensed this, and we've worked with the engineers in Austria, with our engineers here in America to basically develop our first two plants. And we are at the end of what's called the feed engineering stage in our projects. Again, getting more granular. If you look at this diagram, we have two chambers in our gasifier. On the right side is a gasification chamber. We have high temperature, about 850, so our wood chips come in. And if you think of wood being cellulose and lignin, it goes from a solid to a gaseous state. About 90% is converted in a few instant seconds into gas. And it's hydrogen, carbon monoxide, CO, methane, CH4, and some CO2, and then we have a little bit of nitrogen gas. So that gas comes, we call that product gas or syngas. But what doesn't get basically converted is a little bit of biochar. And go to the second chamber to your left on the screen, we have a combustion chamber, which we force hot air. That creates basically an exothermic reaction that burns, and that creates the hot sand that goes and runs the gasifier. So once we start on natural gas, it basically runs on its own heat. And then I'll talk about the downstream here in a second. So for our hydrogen project, again, we had the two chambers. The syngas comes to the top. We clean and scrub out the tars. That's been, if you guys have been familiar with gasification, there's been a lot of challenges of gasifiers that get gummed up and you can't keep the tar out, and so that doesn't run an engine to make electricity. And the tars are critical to be scrubbed out for doing any kind of downstream for making methane, green diesel, or aviation fuel. So we've got that process. It's been tested for hundreds of thousands of hours. Then we go through a water gas shift reactor that takes the water, it creates more hydrogen. We scrub out the CO2 using an amine scrubber. And then to the right, the magic of creating hydrogen separation is called pressure swing absorption. Hydrogen's the smallest molecule. We're able to separate that, pull out the hydrogen. But what doesn't fully get converted there is a bit of methane tail gas and some other gases, little CO, that we reform, and that pushes back up. You can see the arrow back to the middle. So we maximize hydrogen production. We also have the same diagram. We can do SAF, we can do methane, and we've engineered all these pathways to have kind of flexibility depending on the market. Our California projects, we're targeting hydrogen. Just believe the market's there and it's the highest value. For every ton of wood, we get more value. We have 3 projects here in California that are under development. We're close to getting our permitting on the first 2 projects. I'm very excited that hoping to get that launched here very soon. And that's where we're at in California. We'll produce about 7,000 tons of hydrogen per year at these plants. And you think about it, that's enough for about 500 heavy-duty trucks a day, or roughly about 800 to 900 buses. Again, this technology was developed in Austria, 2002. This plant here that you can see in the foreground, it was small. It was only 2 megawatts, but they actually created about 500 jobs for their local community. They used the waste heat to run a wood drying for a flooring company who was making flooring, and a pasta company who was making pasta. So it was transformative. They had 40 heads of state around the world come see this facility. They had like 30,000 visitors. So, first time the Europeans were able to see a real commercial facility built. So that's been done, 8 times globally. We'll be the first time in the United States to use this technology, and we've had to learn how to translate all the, standard units and metric over to our system for our engineers. But we've done that, and we're ready to go to work. Um, and again, why are we pursuing hydrogen or SAF or RNG? And I just put this little chart on the table here to show that, in the past we've had, use biomass for heat or electricity, but the dollars per ton of value are just too low to really spend a lot of money. I mean, feedstock prices here, if you go to combustion facilities, are paying like $30 to $45 a ton. Well, if you're in forestry, you know that you can't get out in the bush in the woods and haul it and chip it and get it to a facility for that. So we need a higher value proposition to be able to utilize this wood. And that's why we pursued hydrogen and SAF and RNG from our product. On the hydrogen front, in California, we have enough wood waste to replace probably 65 to 70% of all the diesel that's used in California using biomass. And so we've got trucks, heavy duty truck class 8. There's several that have been testing, like Hyundai is probably the biggest one, but we see Toyota, Daimler, and Volvo have come up with a big announcement. They're pursuing their fuel cell, but there's also hydrogen engines. Cummins and others have a hydrogen engine that are coming online. So trucks, probably the largest in California are the municipalities. There's several hundred buses using hydrogen, including my hometown in Fresno. We have about 25 hydrogen buses that are on order. We have like 3 on the road now. So it's become a growing market. We've kind of coined our kind of tagline from stump to pump as our company. Everything from, I am a forest economist, so we're actually doing forest inventory and evaluation with our own crews, all the way to, working with the Forest Service. We do have tribal partners, and that basically is our feedstock side. We, supply that to our plant, but we're also involved right down to the pump on our distribution. And the reason for that is we don't just sell it at the gate and say, it's off the truck and we get a check. A lot of the value are the credits. So we're getting as much value on the credits as we are from the actual product. And to do that, we have to have relationship all the way to the pump. So where the pump at the gate comes out and they, record that, we actually have to report that back to our California Air Resources Board, and that generates what's called a low carbon fuel standard credit. And that's worth a lot to us, a couple dollars a kilogram. So that's kind of our philosophy of how we operate. Again, this is kind of, we got 2 companies, our Yosemite Cleans on the production side, Yosemite Fuels on the distribution and the end use side. And again, our first project, we're having a permitting meeting tomorrow. We're ready to pull the permits on our 2 projects in Oroville, which is Butte County, and in Tuolumne County. We've been at it for longer than I want to admit, 8 years. We've had most of our team together for most of that period. We're based I'm from Mariposa, California, but we're based in Fresno, California. And with that, I'll just say if there's any questions, yeah, we're just thankful all of our partners, but answer any questions if you guys have on the technology and our approach. And we are looking outside of California. We have a grant in Colorado. We're looking more at SAF out there in the Rio Grande National Forest in the San Luis Valley. And we're open to talk to anybody that's interested in, kicking the tires and looking at how this might fit as a community-based solution in your region. So with that, I will just open up for questions, or if you want to do that now, Francesca, or you want to wait, I don't know.
Yeah, since you have to leave early,
Yeah.
why don't we open it up for questions?
Mhm.
You know, uh, I'll start with one, if and Kevin will actually get into an Colusa Indian Energy, so he's going to have an answer for this from the tribal side. But what do
Mhm.
you think are the biggest challenges for tribes to fit into this market?
Well,
Um,
actually the tribes, I'll say there's challenges, but they actually have more opportunity because the renewable fuel standard is another bonus that I don't have in our financial model that we've been fighting for 7 years, and the tribes received that blessing about a year and a half ago. So
Oh,
all the fuel
okay.
coming off the tribal lands is qualifies for a renewable fuel credit at the federal level, which would even add, like right now, it'd be about $5 more a kilogram. So there's a huge, I mean, the tribes would be the most profitable biofuels producers in America, frankly, full stop. So I think this is a great opportunity for tribes. On the downside, everywhere we go, the challenge has been offtake. It's been slow, it's hard, and you got to have credit-worthy offtakes. We've spent 4 years on our offtake agreement getting something to stick. It's you start early and it's a lot of, you're working with big companies, but honestly, we need like, I would say if the government were to able to come in with a seed capital to backstop, I call it put a floor price. We've set up a program called a captive insurance. We'll take part of our profit and put it in there to hedge against the floor price dropping. But if we had the government help, hey, look, we'll go underneath the floor price to back this for the first 10 years, this would, literally it would ignite a whole renaissance for seeing forest projects everywhere. Because the hardest thing for us has been getting a contract for an offtake, and the financing doesn't happen without an offtake.
Right. Interesting. Um, I toured some hydrogen facilities, including in Silicon Valley, a company that's making self fuels. Um, and I wonder what you think. I would say maybe after the IRA was passed, it seemed like there was a lot of projections that at least on the West Coast, including California, Oregon, and Washington, going up
Mm.
to BC probably, that there was going to be a big build out of the hydrogen market, partly off of California, right? Do you
Yes.
see that as just temporarily slowed down? Has it slowed down? Do you still see that as the
Yeah.
future?
Yeah, for the first question, yes, there's no doubt that with the IRA, there's been a slowdown on everything with a lot of the hydrogen hub money getting pulled.
Yeah.
It's frustrating to, have mixed signals. We're still fighting on some of the rules out of Treasury and the IRS on everything from whether it's hydrogen, SAF. It's one thing to put the carrot out there and have something in law, but we've been waiting like nearly 4 years to get rules and we still don't have certainty. So it's frustrating at best with the bankers going, well, what, get a rule, we'll get you financed. So, but with that, I'll say California is doubling down on hydrogen, and the rest of the world is more than doubled down. I went to China last summer and saw their whole hydrogen demonstration zone and their unit at scale, producing, trucks, buses, trains. We see it in Europe. There's other places that are just making hydrogen ubiquitous. It's really if we don't do this, I mean, I'll say right now with the prices for our diesel in California, will be a lower cost than diesel right now that we could supply long-term contracts with maybe an inflation that's good, but we don't have this bump of the oil market. We'd be a cheaper solution and more certainty for municipal contracts and people that want to have certainty on their fuel. I think it's a great opportunity that, we just got to keep building. And, again, the supply chain, we need other people to say, hey, we're still in the game on this. So obviously the supply chain is a big part of that. And then having end users to say the equipment's available. So trucks and buses, but we have our first locomotives in California that are on hydrogen, the Zero Railway. And I just read one in Canada, the Canadian Pacific has 8 that they're testing. So rail, I mean, we could see a huge, I mean, the demand for rail would be enormous itself, and they would use thousands of kilograms for just one locomotive every day. So those would be great anchor kind of customers.
Great. So, Kevin, I think you're up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to discuss a little bit about, excuse me, Colusa Indian Energy. We're the only tribally owned energy developer EPC contractor in the U.S. So we're part of a Section 17, wholly owned by the Cashel Dehi Band of Wintun Indians of the Colusa Indian community, which is a little bit of a a little bit of a long name, but colloquially known as the Colusa tribe. So CIE was formed because The tribe had been operating a microgrid in island mode for the last 22 years. And for the previous 14 years, we've had no outages. So while other people are talking about, the percentage of uptime, our cogen plan is a one and a decimal point. So it's even ironic because when PG&E has outages, they park their trucks at the C-store and the casino parking lot because it's the only place around that still has power. And tribal council didn't want anybody to know that there was a microgrid because they saw it as a competitive advantage for gaming. So while other gaming facilities had blackouts, Colusa was on all the time, and people would come there during a blackout to stay in the hotel and to spend the time on the gaming floor. So when other tribes started to do this a little bit more, like Blue Lake Rancheria, Pachanga. There's one or two other tribes that had started talking about microgrids and putting it together. Tribal council was like, okay, it's probably not that much of a competitive advantage anymore if other people start doing it. So they formed a for-profit CIE and we kind of stepped out of the shadows. Since the launch, which was about, I want to say 27 or 28 months ago, something like that, relatively short amount of time, that we've gone just an amazing amount of growth. So we're currently engaged with just under 100 tribes in various forms of either microgrids or solar or some sort of energy development. And we've also engaged a number of data centers as off-takers. So as the data center sector kind of starts to understand the value of moving their operations onto tribal trust land, we're starting to be able to build the behind the meter power and wait for the utility connections. So when we build these things, we've got a track record to show that we can operate them. And then, as grid power comes in as parallel, it's another option, and it's potentially a large revenue source and a big catalyst for economic development, workforce development. All the different things can really, if the deals are structured right, can really benefit tribes. We've got two or three projects that are in various stages right now that are actually germane to this conversation. One of them is a company that's got some new technology where they create some of the precursors to graphene. So rather than trying to run the entire value chain, what they're doing is they're creating some of these precursors from forestry, sawmill waste, and creating it's not activated charcoal, but it's I forgot the actual name of it. With that system, they've got basically three revenue sources. The first one is actually selling the precursors to a graphene company, which is the primary source of revenue. But also in the creation process, there are hydrogen, natural gas, or renewable natural gas or methane rather, that are formed that they can separate and then either inject that back into the pipeline, or we can burn it, or we can burn the natural gas and create electricity. So there's some heat capture on on these systems, and then there's the potential for connecting to like a reciprocating engine. The fuels wouldn't really work in a turbine configuration, but using a recip engine, which is, for those of you that don't know what a recip engine is, basically just a big giant car engine that you bolt to the ground and you burn natural gas or some other gas, diesel even through it. They're just huge V8s is essentially what they are. So we put those, building out this project. It's not tribal per se. So the first kind of pilot is not really on tribal lands, but we're investigating the technology as a potential investment to add it to our portfolio of offerings. So we're not a solar company. We're not a natural gas company. We're a tribal energy company. So when we talk to tribes, we try to figure out what their needs are, what they're having issues, and then create a solution, as opposed to most other developers, which roll into tribal council chambers and say, here's the solution you need, give us a big check for it. So we try to do the opposite of that and figure out what they really need. And there's a lot of tribes that have forestry lands, forestry operations, sawmills, all of these waste products that can be used in this and create higher value projects. So that's one that we're looking at. We're evaluating it. We're still in due diligence, but it's looking pretty promising that this will continue to go forward because we do have some contingent financing in place. We're just waiting for that to all go through, which is kind of piggybacked on our due diligence a little bit. But we'll have the ability to do that, and we'll process 60 tons a day. So it's not a huge place, but 60 tons is still pretty significant, moving that waste product through. The other potential project that we've got is it's kind of unique that we're trying to adapt some existing pyrolysis to create mobile units. And the reason that we want to do this is because there's and we're working in conjunction with another tribe's economic development company that this particular solution will be able to move to different locations and take up the deadfall. So we're not using sawmills or chippings from, forests that have been cut down for human consumption. We're just going through and basically picking up sticks and running them through the process because California, the biggest risk of forest fires is all the deadfall that's lying around. Once that gets ignited by either a falling wire or a lightning strike or somebody with a careless cigarette, that can cause a huge amount of damage. And everything we've looked at from the economics, 50 miles seems to be the radius of transport. It's ironic that for wood, for manure, for anything, that you're trying to use as feedstock, you've got a 50-mile radius before the transportation blows up the economics. So rather than being limited to having to put a bunch of these things in various places, because once you clean up the deadfall, it's going to take a while for it to reaccumulate. You can be more capital efficient by being able to move these around and go through the process and capture either the renewable natural gas or the hydrogen and the CO2. So instead of having a pipeline, you're basically creating all of this, putting it into a container, and then now you have products that you can ship or deliver to a terminal, or deliver to an injection point if you want to put it into a pipeline. But that kind of solves the 50-mile radius issues, while also providing economic development opportunities. There's operators that are going to need to learn how to do these. You've got CDL truck drivers. So it's a way to diversify away from, gaming and entertainment. And you're doing something to protect the environment and creating a renewable source of fuel that's right there. So that's kind of the third or the second of the projects that we've got. That's also a little bit in pilot. We're working through a grant application with the state of California, and I believe it's their forestries division. They have some secret pot of money that they have grant opportunities for. So we've been, ferreting around trying to find all of the little pieces that we can put together. But there seems to be excitement on the forestry side. And we could get some grants to start piloting this and really testing the technology because we're kind of converting a stationary system into a mobile system that will run on trailers. So there's all the logistics of that. And, so it's not quite ready for prime time, but the technology looks promising. The business case looks promising. We just need to find some initial funding to get that one off the ground. I think that could be a good leader for not only California, but everywhere where there's big forests. I mean, the upper Midwest has, a ton of forest, the Pacific Northwest, all of these places, deadfall is an issue for, forestry management and reduction of impact of wildfires. The third project, which is the one that I thought was kind of most interesting, is that we're taking reciprocating engine and creating a combined heat and power generator, and we're using that to power a cannabis grow operation. So the power generated is lighting the grow lights and having some environmental control. But we're taking the waste heat and running it through a absorption chiller so that we can have cool air if the facility needs to, adjust temperature down. We also have hot water if we need to keep the plants at a certain temperature. We can use the hot water um, to increase the temperature in the building. And then we got some other technology that our chief technology officer has invented. He's got a patent on it, where we're taking natural gas and knocking the carbon off of the methane and slipstreaming hydrogen back into the flow. So we get about 20% hydrogen. Anything more, you've got to have more piping, and the molecules are so small they sneak out of the piping. So there's a lot more leakage and issues you have with a higher concentration of 20% of hydrogen in your methane stream. But burning that not only creates for the decarbon process, then we'll have essentially elemental carbon coming out of this that we can sell into the markets. But by slipstreaming the hydrogen, we have more liquid, we have more water in the emission stack. So we chill that down, drop the water out, use the water and send it back to the cannabis plants and use that to grow. So there's less water demand because we're creating water from the combustion of that, and then we're capturing all of the CO2 and piping it back into the building as well. So these grow operations have, giant CO2 tanks that they basically just open up for the plants and dump CO2 in the air. And the plants don't use all of it. It's a higher CO2 concentration in the grow house, but they're taking industrial CO2, which is actually fairly expensive, and just pouring it in there. Rather than doing that and adding more greenhouse gases and an expensive spend of industrial gases, we're taking the combustion and pushing it in there. And we've got there's some technology, it's called selective catalytic reduction. So this technology drops the emissions down to basically 4 parts per million for CO2 and 2.5 parts per million NOx, which is below any published level. So we're at the lowest environmental emissions with some of this CapEx. This works because the value of the plants are higher, and in California, their electricity is in the PG&E district that they're in. Their electricity is about 240 to 250 bucks a megawatt hour, or 24 to 25 cents a kilowatt hour, which is ridiculously expensive. So we can generate power probably in the 125 to $150 a megawatt hour, or 12 and a half to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So we're reducing their cost. We're reducing their cost of buying the CO2. We're giving them water so they don't have to take water from a municipality because it's coming off the emission stack. And we're supplying CO2 as well, so they don't have to purchase as much CO2 as an industrial gas. So those are kind of the 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 projects that we're looking at and trying to really bring innovation into the tribal energy space, and making these projects to where there's an environmental advantage, there's an economic advantage, and then there's a cash flowing advantage to the tribes. But also this can scale really quickly. So once any of these projects really take off and we work through all of the different pieces, certainly, you know, bio stationary for forestry products. There's a ton of places to go with that. There's a ton of, sawmills and wood products that are, have to be dealt with. That could be useful, and having those 40, 50 miles apart with an ample supply of feedstock, that's what makes it work. It's really, if it's not for, if you solve for the transportation, it's always quality of the feedstock. Is it consistent? Are you having to change operations all the time? That makes for a little bit of an operational nightmare, but with the technology and the control technology that's being embedded into some of these systems, it's making it easier and easier. So it's not just, somebody watching an analog meter and trying to adjust all the dials. The system optimizes and can figure out from various sensors in real time how to control the system. The the mobile piece, obviously can go a lot of different places, and there's a lot of that the deadfall that's there. And now that, as of this morning, I think Trump has rescheduled cannabis from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3. So no longer is it a dangerous narcotic with no medicinal value and tremendous penalties of jail time. Now it's a Schedule 3 that operates, like testosterone supplements and codeine, Tylenol with codeine. So there'll be a lot less criminal penalties at the federal level, but more importantly, this unlocks the cannabis operators from being able to deduct all of their business expenses and use the federal banking system to move money around. So as that happens, they can grow their they can grow their they can grow their markets pretty significantly. We also actually, there's a fourth one. I completely forgot about this one because it's still in nascent stages. We're negotiating and trying to figure out if there's a business model here. But one of the other feedstocks that we've been looking at is hemp and cannabis. So when you process the hemp and get the CBD oils out, you're taking like a 0.5% of the weight of the plant out. So you've got all of this waste that in places like Colorado is just stacking up because they don't know what to do with it. Michigan's starting to be a problem because most of the cannabis is processed from flower into extracts, and then it's frozen and then put into food and gummies and things like that. But we can use that feedstock, and that's quite a useful feedstock because the cellulose, whatever the cellulose ligand combination in that particular plant, lends itself very well to the pyrolysis systems and creating all of these value added projects. So as we're helping the growers grow more. We're also helping the processors get rid of the waste and not have it just piling up or having to mulch it out because these plants are really fibrous. It takes a long time for them to dissolve. And we're solving all of those problems and creating opportunities for any tribe that wants to participate in. And we're looking at ramping these up fairly quickly once we prove everything out, shake the ladder, so to speak, and make sure all the economics are working. So it's kind of my diatribe on biomass things that we're looking at, and we're not really technology, dependent. We're agnostic. We'll take anybody's system that works. We're just trying to figure out what operational equipment solves the problem the best. So if it's, woody mass, does somebody's technology process that better than somebody else's that maybe can do the cannabis stalk or some other things that could be potentially feedstocks. Sawdust is another one. A lot of people have to pelletize it before they can use it, but I know there's some technology where you can directly inject the sawdust into the reaction chamber and generate the products that you're looking for. But these are all things that the market's really not there. It's finding the pilots and then proving out the business cases, and then once that happens, we'll be able to really really scale these things. So I think our role in the ecosystem is really more of the engineering and the construction and the operations of these systems, and then showing that that the economics really do work from the projected side, and then using that expertise to help deploy these systems, whether they're on tribal trust land or it's a non-tribal location. So that's kind of my presentation, if you will. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments
No,
or anything.
super interesting. I think one question I would have is, um, is Colusa Energy now, or will it be in a position to be able to get to, do the carbon credit voluntary market so you can make
Yeah,
even
that's part of,
more. Yeah.
yeah, so we include that in some of our analysis, but after the last, what, 18 months, we're really looking at, can these projects survive, or are they profitable with no government fiat, no handouts, no credits, no grants, no tax credits, anything like that, because we've seen that those can disappear in the stroke of a pen. So these are long-term projects at 15, 20 years where you're having your supply agreements or your power purchase agreements. And if those can't survive, in absence of all these credits, potentially in 4, 5, 6 years or next week, you could lose all of the things that drive the economics. So we're really careful to look at it as, all right, there's no subsidies of any sort. Are we close to breaking even? Are we be able to turn a profit? And then if we feather in some of those incentives, what does that look like? Because you're really playing with house money at that point in time. And then there's other options as well. The Indian Carbon Coalition, um,
Mhm.
Brian Van Stippen's made some pretty big advances on selling carbon credits of standing timber of tribes, where they just go through and audit it. I think it's semi-annually. Fond du Lac tribe has really embraced that because they have some pretty big timber holdings. So they've been able to generate some revenue off of that market. But yeah, we're always looking at these markets, so whether it's a 45 production credit or it's a 48E that we can use in some manner. The 48Es are probably going to basically go away. So it's going to be the production tax credits that then will have a tradable asset that meets the IRS stipulations on how that can work. But then there's also the voluntary markets and all sorts of other things that we can use. Particularly when you start looking at, if we're injecting into the grid, I think there's a case that we can make that by using the biomass, and because it's low sulfur outputs, that when you look at the grid and how much coal is there and how much the sulfur output is in these markets, by creating energy or electricity with these systems, you've got the avoided emissions of a sulfur producing system. So there should be some level of credit where that could be traded, and then we can sell that to Google, Amazon, any of these big companies that hoover up all these credits because they're trying to offset their emission stack, that we can create some market for that. And there is a little bit of precedence in it. Europe's got a fairly strong sulfur market. Quebec and California have kind of a trading marketplace for that's been establishing. So we're always looking at that, but those are kind of follow on or secondary pieces as opposed to the primary focus of the due diligence and all of the pre-work to make sure that these things survive. Because we've heard of 3 or 4 projects that were going along and they lost grant funding. So now they're totally ruined because they've got all the equipment, they can't get anything more, the grant was pulled from them, or nobody wants to finance anything. It's kind of chaos in that space, and it scares us. So we want to make
Yeah.
sure that if we're bringing any of these projects to the tribe or another tribe, that they're going to have a chance. We're de-risking it as much as possible. Yeah, their revenue may drop, but revenue dropping and still being profitable is far superior to, oh, the project is really negative and now we just need to mothball and shutter it. Because I don't know how many reservations I've been on. We're like, what's that project? It was like, oh, that's one that started and didn't work. And even for the tribe I worked at before, there was a wind turbine that was just a total fiasco. And
Mm.
those are the kind of things that we want to avoid as Colusa Indian Energy, because our mantra from the tribal council that essentially owns us is to help tribes develop any energy capacity, bring good projects to them, and protect the tribe from nefarious actors. So that's what we're really trying to do, and that's kind of our mandate as well. And we take it pretty seriously.
Great. Brad, you have a question.
I do actually multiple, but I'll keep it limited. Kevin, good to see you. It's also
Good to see
great
you.
to hear what you're up to. I had a hunch you'd be up to a lot of good stuff, as usual. Um, this system that does the slipstream extraction of hydrogen and carbon, is this membrane based and
No,
low
so
temperature?
that's yeah. So that's the nice thing about the about our hydrogen system is that it's low temperature, and I forgot what the temperature is, but it wouldn't be low to me. Like me, low temperature. I'm from Michigan, so low temperature is like 10 degrees. This is still like 700 or 800 degrees, so it's still to me that seems high, but apparently it's considered low temperature. But what it does is it's a low temperature uh, uh, electric generated plasma that just essentially vibrates the hydrogen off of the carbon. So most hydrogen is created by either some sort of reverse membrane or some electrolysis. And electrolysis is typically a 2-to-1 disadvantage. They haven't figured out to design the catalyst to make it at least balance. So you have to essentially put in, say, 200 kilowatts to get 100 kilowatts of hydrogen out. So it's an upside down formula. The technology that we have on the bench tests and on the pilot projects, we're a 4-to-1 advantage. So we can put in 25 kilowatts of energy to get 100 kilowatts of hydrogen. So we're positive advantage. So essentially, we're creating free hydrogen from the methane that we're already buying, dropping the carbon out, which reduces our carbon emissions on the back end, but also gives us a product that we can sell because pure carbon has a lot of value in the marketplace. And then running that through and capturing the water so we'll be water positive. We can use that for makeup water on the closed loop system. That's one of the other things that I forgot to mention too. And um, it, I don't know when it started, but it seemed like it was 5 or 6 weeks ago that every tribe lost its collective mind over the water use of some data centers and some power generation. I think it was a lot of disinformation came in. Our systems that we have are closed loop on the combustion side or the generation side. So once you charge the system, the water just circulates. There's some makeup water because it evaporates and as it goes through heating and cooling, and it leaks out a little bit, but not a lot. I mean, it's not a huge amount. And then, if there's a data center or anywhere else, that's a closed loop heat exchanger as well. So we're not using millions of gallons of water on an evaporative system that's just basically sucking all the available water out of a particular system. We charge it once, and yeah, it could be a couple 100,000 gallons, but anytime we're bringing these to the tribes, we're typically buying the water from the tribe. So they're not, we're just not taking it saying, give us this water. It's, here's the water. Do you want to sell it to us, or should we bring water in? Because you can bring, I think it's like 30,000 gallons a truckload or something like that. So 2 or 3 truckloads, we can typically fill a system. So we're always cognizant about deploying the best technology, deploying the technology that's proven to work, or if it's not proven, that it's at a pilot scale. So we're not investing hundreds of millions of dollars of our money, the tribe's money, or another investor on kind of unproven stuff, and then making sure that the tribes extract as much economic value and also protection of the environment for their communities. So we want these projects to be really successful and to always be aligned with the best interest of the tribe.
Can we come and do a tour of this sometime? Bring folks there.
When we build it, yeah. All these projects are still in various levels of kind of working through it. I think the one that's probably closest is going to be, I want to say it's in Wyoming, but it may be Montana. I don't know for sure. The one that creates the precursors to graphene. That one I think we're closest to getting final investment decision and financing in place. So when we build that one, absolutely we'll have tours and people coming to see that, as well as our own microgrid that we operate, so people can see how a well-run microgrid with a unity uptime um, is there. Because I mean, literally, there's probably you can count on one hand the number of microgrids that have been up without an outage for 14 years. And most of those are NORAD and DoD installations, and the little tiny tribe in the middle of Central California.
Yeah, I've actually driven by now Colusa tribe several times now.
Yeah.
And one thing that occurred to me, our focus is forest biomass, but wondering if you're doing any, securing any biomass with these huge farms surrounding the Colusa tribe.
That's, yep, that's what we're looking at as well. Each of these, the tribe actually, has that small casino and hotel operation, but it's an agricultural tribe. It's got
Mm.
20,000 acres of agricultural land, an almond, a walnut, and a rice processing plant. So there's significant biomass that's sitting there. We just got to figure out, which systems use that. And these biosystems, we've had people come to us that need our help in either constructing it or some engineering piece or doing things like that. So we're getting to evaluate the technology as we get hired to put it all together and see how it runs, which is kind of the best way of learning how this goes is on somebody else's capital dime is doing that because they've got their funding and we can see how it works and then figure out where that could fit into our operations. But yeah, there is a ton of agricultural processing that's right along I-5 that's within 50 miles. So we're about 100 miles north of Sacramento. So when from 100 miles south and 100 miles north, or 50 miles south, 50 miles north, that's a huge amount of farming operations. And we're a close partner with Redding Rancheria. So I think their 50-mile radius is pretty close to overlapping where ours is. So they're another really their economic development department kind of has the same mindset as we do. So they're trying to, piggyback on a number of these systems as well. So as we bring in other partners and we test these systems, there's a lot of advantages for our area. It's just happened to be, happenstance that somebody else had a project already cited, but they needed our assistance in some fashion. And so that's where we went. That's where we went. So it wasn't necessarily us trying to cite a place or cite a project. We are on a couple of them, a couple of different ones that aren't far enough along even to be worth mentioning, but we're always kind of looking at that as how we can move something onto Colusa. That way we'll have more control of it. We'll have people in the area. It just makes a little bit more sense.
That's
And when you
interesting.
when you drove by Colusa, did you notice the microgrid?
I did. That was
You did? You saw
actually,
it?
yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to, yeah, I pulled off to get gas. So then I drove around
Oh,
the
okay.
actual
You're
casino.
Yeah, no, you're much more observant than I am because when I
Yeah,
first started working at Colusa,
yeah.
it's probably kind of a horribly embarrassing story, but I was meeting some tribal leaders out at the microgrid because they wanted a tour of it, and I'd only been employed there. This is the first time I'd been out to Colusa, and I've been traveling to a billion other conferences, but I went out to meet them, and I called to the control room because I was staying in the hotel. I called the control room. I was like, "Yeah, the tribal leaders are going to be here about 30 minutes. I just want to drive over to where the microgrid is, see it, get lay of the land, so I can guide everybody in when they start calling me and saying they're lost or something like that." And I didn't know it. And they're like, "Yeah, just pull around back. We're right,
Yeah,
we're right in the back." So I drove around the casino three times because I was looking for a microgrid that was out in a field somewhere. And then
yeah,
I called them back. I was just like, "Where the hell is this thing?" And they were on the other side of the fence, and they just like look to your left and up, and then there was the big giant Colusa Indian Energy sign. I was like, "Oh Jesus!" I rolled around this place for three times like an idiot because I didn't even see
yeah,
it. To me, it looked like a loading dock. I mean, all the other tribal casinos I've ever been to, that green fence, I was like, oh, that's where the loading dock is. They put the fence down when the cash truck comes in and they drive into that little garage. That's what I thought it was. And they made no noise. It didn't look like anything. And
yeah.
So I was like
Well,
horribly
I had to
embarrassed.
ask if that helps. I had to
Okay, all right. So you did.
ask.
You had to call in reinforcements.
Yes, a lot of the projects that we look closely at, especially in the carbon removal world, uh, it looks like there's a real advantage for tribes who have a separate economic development corporation or Section 17, right? Do you think, I mean, is even building out microgrids as a first step for tribes, is it more of an advantage even for that step to have Section 17 status?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Section 17 always has advantages because it allows a tribe to create a for-profit business that can operate outside of tribal trust land without taxation. So that's the biggest thing is that, if you're in a thin margin business, and this is what I did a ton of when I was at Saginaw Chippewa, is look for businesses that were thin margin that we could bring onto tribal trust land or take control over. And as soon as we didn't have to, that were just profitable but were thin margins, that if we were able to take a controlling interest in those businesses, then we would eliminate the federal corporate tax. At the time, it was 21%. So a 21% boost in margin on a 5% margin, net margin is a pretty big advantage. So then we could either compete by lowering prices and keeping the same margin, or we were just more profitable and could expand our operations. Excuse me, particularly on, those businesses that benefit from volumes of scale. So those are
Gotcha.
always advantageous. The other the other one is that tribes don't pay sales tax. So if you're in a high sales tax like California, which I think is 10.5% or something like that, 10%. So you get 10% capital improvement or a 10% cheaper project for the same capacity. So, tribes coming in and, 10%, on $1 million gas station or $3 million. I don't think you can build a gas station for $1 million anymore, but 3.5 to 5 million, the 10%, yeah, that's meaningful. But when your capex goes down 500 grand, so your financing costs are down, your operating margins are a little higher because of your capex. But when you're talking about $1 billion power system or multi-billion-dollar power system, all of a sudden that 10% becomes a massive number. And that's where you're really taking advantage of it. And it's not only the tax benefits of the Section 17, but if the Section 17 is running an operation on trust land that the state and local regulations don't apply, and the tribe's permitting process does. So there's lots of opportunities from a regulatory standpoint of moving a project farther. I mean, I talk to people every day that are stuck in permitting, or it took us 2 years to get this far, or things like that. And when you're carrying a balance on a development budget and your permitting gets pushed out 6 months, that's a huge impact to the economics of that project. But with a tribe, it's its own permitting agent, and many tribes are starting to exert primacy over environmental reviews. So they either do it through HUD or I forgot the other one, but they can do Hearth Act or Hearth Ordinance. If they create a Hearth Ordinance, they can take over NEPA reviews and environmental impact assessments. There's also a little known place, the Fast 41s. That's more on a project by project basis, but the tribe can take those economic reviews on those. And the nice thing is the tribes don't have a $200 million floor for participation in the Fast 41 program. So there's a ton of different benefits of running these through a Section 17 that people don't necessarily understand. I probably spend 60% of my time explaining to people what a tribe is.
Right. So do I.
It's frustrating, but I keep doing it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because the advantages that tribes have often, historically, have been, um, gas, tobacco, gaming, And
Yeah,
so
and you're not going to,
yeah,
yeah, you're
yeah,
not moving the needle. You got a
yeah,
300, you got a casino that's throwing 300 million in top line revenue out. How many gas stations C-stores do you need to even compete with that? And gaming is divisive.
yes.
Tribes are brutally competing against each other, particularly when one tribe tries to invade the market space of another. They
Hmm.
probably spend 15, $20 million just in litigation fees to try to prevent one tribe from moving in on another tribe's territory. And not to discount the social impact of gaming with whatever percentage of the population it affects, but that's very divisive within Indian country. Energy is not that way. Energy is very, very cohesive because you're not picking somebody's pocket. You build a 20 megawatt system and interconnect it on the same circuit that I have a 40 megawatt combined heat and power system. You're not taking anything from me. I'm not taking anything from you, but we're all getting more sovereignty. Without control, sovereignty is an illusion. And
Hmm.
that's what a lot of tribes are starting to see is that, oh, we thought we had control, but we really don't. So now we want to have these controls and we want to take these things over. And they're recycling, some of the gaming dollars. So instead of putting it into bigger and bigger resorts and, more exotic rooms. They're peeling off some of that and putting it in towards energy. Energy can move the needle. A 100 megawatt system, even if you're just selling merchant power, you're running that as base load.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of money that's going to come in. You're paying for it, but then you're paying for more, and you're paying for the casino isn't cheap. It's equivalent in terms of capex for some of the revenue, and I haven't had a discussion with the tribal council. I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3. All my days just blur together in one gelatinous pile of time. But they were all worried. They were interested in a data center concept, but they were all worried about it because it was, data center, what's all this and that. And I just told them, I was like, you run a data center already. They're like, what? Like, have you ever been on the casino floor when the slots tech crack open one of those cases? It's a little brick Dell computer that's in the bottom of those and a massive monitor. Your gaming floor is a data center, but instead of processing, high school, literature papers, you're processing little spinny lights and things like that. And, the results of that data processing are the results of how much you pay out for the gaming or how much you collect as winnings. You're doing the same thing. It's no different.
Yeah.
And that kind of resonated with a couple of them. Like, oh yeah, you're right. We're doing the same thing, but it's got more inky blinky lights, and you get beer and whiskey when you sit at the gaming floor.
Yeah. It's interesting because of over the last 2 months, because of the situation in Iran and how it's affected prices, especially for the rest of the globe. It's definitely affected ours too, but it really helps. I think it helps move along the appetite for the switch to more clean energy, obviously.
Oh yeah,
Love to see 100%, right? But because how can tribal communities, I mean, if oil goes to $200 a barrel and you're paying $10 a gallon, that's really going to slow down a lot of activity, including economic, for tribes. So, not to mention everyone else, but I've really started to think in the last few weeks about the notion of energy sovereignty. Um, you know, because we
yeah. Oh
really
yeah,
think
and
about
that's
sovereignty on so many different levels, but energy is, it turns out, can be one of the most important aspects of output for tribes for sovereignty.
yeah, power. It literally powers everything. I mean, I think Wi-Fi is the only exception to energy that if your power goes out and you don't have power for 2 or 3 hours, you're starting to lose your mind because you're worried about food, you're not being able to watch TV or do anything like that. But if your Wi-Fi goes out for 15 minutes, it's just chaos. I mean, there's people running up and down the street, smashing cars and rolling things over. But it's just those two technologies are so embedded in our human existence that we've come to rely on them. And when they don't happen, we freak out. I remember when, this is kind of dating me, but I remember when, we had internet dial-up and Prodigy, and, occasionally it worked, occasionally it didn't, and, all those different pieces. And now if our internet isn't always on and our lights aren't always on, then it's, a breakdown of the social structure. And being able to have control of that within a tribal community, that's the ultimate flex of sovereign power that a tribal government has, that it can protect its businesses and tribal members by putting these systems in place, even if it offsets some of the power, or it doesn't have to be everything at once. And that's another thing that the tribes are learning, is you don't have to have a big giant massive system all at once. You can put these things in phases, and just understand that you're going to grow, and use those ideas on the front end for the design, so you're not painting yourself into a corner. But you don't need to come up with these massive things. And I think as oil stays up higher, it's going to affect gaming, because first thing people are going to cut are the discretionary spending. Movies, Applebee's, casino floors, those are going to be the industries that are going to see I think, the biggest impact the fastest. And then you're going to roll up to, if it stays up longer, I mean, I hate to say it, but you're probably going to see people avoid preventative medicine. There was a lot of sickness that came out of COVID because people were too afraid to go out, and they didn't go to the doctor, and they had these chronic conditions. If you got chronic diabetes and you don't go see your doctor, it can turn ugly fast, and that's a real risk. And as we diversify away from oil, an oil-based transportation system, we're going to help mitigate some of that effect, particularly on the most exposed population set.
Absolutely.
And I
Brad,
think there's
yeah,
and
go
yeah,
ahead.
and I think to not to belabor the point, but I think that there's a lot of technologies that serve different purposes. Like hydrogen for a passenger car probably is not the best application of it, but hydrogen for a giant semi truck that runs it through a power cell, and then that runs the generators. Taking the train model, and doing that, now you've got a very clean way of transporting a ton of freight. You can do the same thing with trains. I mean, they could carry a whole, like the old steam trains where they carried the water tank. Just carry one of those filled with hydrogen and run a power cell off of that, and now you've got those two modes of transportation. And lithium's good for urban local areas, and then whatever you travel beyond that, gasoline's probably the best now because of the filling stations. But you can certainly reduce that reduction, or you can certainly reduce that usage of petroleum-based fuels relatively easy without a lot of massive capex. You just have to do it right. And that's why I was so disappointed when all the hydrogen stuff got crushed, because they're like, hey, this is actually a good idea. Let's do this. And the government in all of its wisdom killed the one thing that was actually good, and then threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Mhm.
So there's my soapbox on hydrogen.
Great.